Hello and welcome to the Moorpark College Evaluating Faculty in the Online Environment orientation. Let's first talk about what we're going to go over in this orientation. We'll discuss why we're doing the orientation at all, changes in online and distance education from a national, state, and local level, the process at Moorpark College for evaluating online classes, completing the AFT evaluation forms, which are required for all evaluations, and the California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative, or CVC OEI rubrics, applied to Moorpark College online classes. So why do we do this orientation? For a while, faculty and managers have requested an orientation so that we could norm our processes or standardize them so that faculty would experience a more similar process through the evaluation process of their online courses. But to be perfectly honest, that's not really the impetus for this orientation, though it's a good reason for it. Really, the impetus revolves around several changes in online and distance education. At the national level, accreditation or the ACCJC has made some changes that suggest it's a good idea for us to look at our evaluation processes again. More importantly, at the state level, California's Title V, the DE portion of it, was updated just this summer of 2018. And it's critical to know what was updated so that we know what we need to be doing in our online classes. And as evaluators, we know how to evaluate for those things so that we're in keeping with California's Title V. Also at the local level, and this is really the most important impetus, the AFT contract, the one ratified for 2016 through 2019, outlined some new policies and requirements regarding distance education, and many of those impact how we evaluate online classes. The primary reason that we are doing this orientation is because of the changes in our AFT contract. Let's first talk about the ACCJC standards. The ACCJC holds campuses to federal standards, not state standards and not local standards. So they won't be looking for things that have changed in Title V or for what has changed within our contract unless we tell them those are our standards to look at. What they're really focused on are three things. They want to make sure that there are comparable student support services for online students as there are for our residential or face-to-face students. They want to make sure that we have a student authentication process in place, which is handled by our IT. And more specifically and more relevant to this conversation for the evaluation orientation, the ACCJC monitors what is distance education or online education versus correspondence education. And the ACCJC uses DE and online interchangeably as they're only focused on 100% online courses when they refer to DE. The ACCJC defines distance education as education that uses one or more technologies to deliver instruction to students who are separated from the instructor and to support regular and substantive interaction between students and the instructor, either synchronously or asynchronously. They're really focusing on regular and substantive interaction, and that will be a theme throughout this orientation. It's also important to note that the college determines what is meant by regular and substantive interaction, and the ACCJC looks to us to explain to them how we have defined regular and substantive interaction. It's also worth mentioning right now that our campus in 2016-2017 decided to adopt the CVC OEI rubrics as our best practices for teaching online. So our regular and substantive interaction guidelines will be coming out of Title V and the CVC OEI rubrics because we have adopted those through the Distance Education Committee and the Academic Senate as our guidelines or our gold standard for teaching online. They also define through the ACCJC correspondence education. And it's worth explaining what correspondence education is here because Moorpark College does not offer, nor should it be offering, correspondence education courses. Therefore, if you're evaluating a course that looks more like what I'm about to describe, rather than the regular and substantive interactive type of course that is required with online, then we need to note that in an evaluation so that the instructor has the opportunity to adjust and make sure that their course is a DE or online course as described above. According to the ACCJC, which does allow correspondence courses, a correspondence course is defined as having interaction between the instructor and student, but it's limited. It's not regular and substantive. It is typically initiated by the student. So when a student has done an assignment, they reach out to the instructor and say, hey, I'm done. Can you please evaluate that? And in correspondence education, it's typically self-paced. So if as you're evaluating, you run into a course that does not have regular and substantive interaction, that appears to require the student to reach out to the instructor to get feedback or interaction, and operates like a self-paced course, we may be looking at a correspondence course instead of an online course. And at our campus and with our district, we don't offer correspondence courses. We offer online or DE courses. So that would need to be noted so that the instructor can make those changes. The ACCJC also states that correspondence education is not distance education or online education. A little more about the ACCJC. Let's talk about what will happen when they come again for an accreditation visit. It may seem silly to talk about it now. Why don't we wait till accreditation time? But as we're preparing for evaluations, it's worth noting so that we can make sure that as we're evaluating our faculty through the regular evaluation cycles, we can help them get ready for the accreditation visit. For distance education or online, the ACCJC team only reviews 100% online courses in the learning management system, which is Canvas. The ACCJC has new site visit policies. They review online courses from the previous semester, not the current semester in which they're visiting. So they will request from the campus access to previous courses that have been completed so that they can assess all factors that are important to an online course. They will not be entering our existing in-progress courses because if they're coming at the beginning of a semester, they really won't have the opportunity to see everything our instructors do. So they no longer enter existing courses. This also means that they can't accidentally mess something up because we let them in with a lot of privileges so that they can see everything. We'd hate for an accreditor to accidentally delete something or to decide they could grade an assignment. Hopefully they'd never do that. The ACCJC reviewers review for regular and substantive interaction in the classroom as defined by the institution. But this is extremely important to them. They will look for our report in advance to tell them what we mean by regular and substantive interaction in the classroom. And currently, Moorpark's guideline is to use the CVC OEI rubrics and what we have recently learned through California's Title V that we'll discuss in a few minutes. The ACCJC reviews a randomly selected subsection of classes at the college. So they no longer review all of the classes, which they did with Moorpark in 2016, nor do they review just a few classes that a campus sends to them because they decide they just want to see a few courses, and a campus then picks and chooses the ones that they want them to review. Instead, the research department randomly selects 100% online classes from the previous semester, and they randomly select what would be the equivalent to 10% of our online courses or 15 sections, whichever is larger. So at Moorpark College, we will be sending them 10% of our online courses. So if we have 120 CRNs in one particular semester, we would send 10% of those. So actually 15 would be a larger sample for that. However, by the time the ACCJC comes back again, we will likely be offering closer to 200 or more CRNs a class, which means we'll be sending 20 plus classes online for them to take a look at. The ACCJC assesses how and when a student is required to interact with an application or resource that is hosted outside of the approved learning management system that is supported by the campus. Areas of concern include students being sent directly to an outside site to complete schoolwork rather than logging into Canvas to access the material or the external site. So students are regularly being sent to a publisher's site to complete their coursework, or to a privately maintained and hosted learning management system that is not the one that the school maintains and manages. This is a red flag and considered problematic for many reasons. If you have questions about that, please contact your dean. Regular and substantive cannot happen if the student is learning mostly within an external site. So accreditors are very concerned when they see excessive use of external sites, again, provided by publishers, or maybe a website that a faculty member or a nonprofit hosts that we send students to, or another learning management system that is not the learning management system of the campus. One of the reasons that they're concerned about this is that we cannot maintain accessibility, and we cannot maintain that the course site will be available because we don't have control over it. So it's really critical that most of what we do be hosted within our learning management system. Also, assignments typically cannot be tracked after a class ends, nor can older records be located by the institution when external sites are used for assignments and records. So it's a red flag for the ACCJC to see an excessive use of external sites where students are completing work, because if there's ever a grievance or a need to look back at student work, we would need to be able to access those records for several years, and an external site is not necessarily and typically not going to maintain that. Now let's talk about changes in California's Title V as they relate to distance education. The focus of the changes that occurred in the summer of 2018 focus on interaction, and interaction especially among students. So not interaction with the instructor and the students, which is also important, and there's discussion on that, but a key element that's been added is the interaction among the students. So in section 55204, with regard to instructor contact, the district governing boards should ensure, and this is quoted from Title V, that any portion of a course conducted through distance education includes regular and substantive interaction between instructor and students, and among students, either synchronously or asynchronously, through group or individual meetings, orientation and review sessions, supplemental seminar or study sessions, field trips, library workshops, telephone contact, voicemail, email, or other activities. Regular and substantive interaction is an academic and professional matter pursuant to section 53200. I've provided the content as it was edited to see what was added, and so that you can see what was redacted. Notice that effective contact was removed and replaced with substantive interaction in 2 places. So having effective contact with a student is deemed not enough by Title V. It has to be substantive, so with substance, and it has to be interactive. So an iterative back and forth process between the instructor and students, and also substantive interaction among students, so students with their peers. Also notice that they removed correspondence, because in California, correspondence courses are not akin to online or DE courses. And as I've mentioned, at Moorpark College, we don't offer correspondence courses. We only offer online distance ed courses as described with the regular and substantive interaction. Also, under section 55208, the faculty selection and workload section, they added, instructors of distance education shall be prepared to teach in the specific distance education delivery method in alignment with local district policies and negotiated agreements. This is a whole new section that was added, and hopefully the grammar was edited for those purposes and accepted this summer. And essentially what they're saying is our distance ed delivery methods and models need to be aligned with our policies and negotiated agreements. This orientation helps you understand our negotiated agreement, which is our AFT agreement, and helps you understand the CVC OEI rubrics, which have been approved by our academic senate. Now let's talk about the AFT contract and the changes there. And these are the most significant to our evaluation processes, but as you will see, they all connect with the ACCJC and the Title V changes. Changes to the district's AFT contract include several things regarding DE. I'm going to focus here only on those that are relevant to our evaluation processes. But I strongly encourage people to read Section 23 of the AFT contract because there are several things that have changed. First, recertification is required when a learning management system changes or when a faculty member has not taught hybrid or online for 3 consecutive semesters. So when we switched to Canvas, everyone had to be recertified. If for some reason we change learning management systems again, and I do not anticipate that happening anytime in the next few years, but if that were to happen, we would need to recertify everyone. What that recertification training or process might look like is to be determined, but we would have to provide some sort of recertification process, and everyone would have to do it to continue to be able to teach in our distance education courses, which within our district include hybrid and online courses. So anytime there is any seat time that is moved out of the face-to-face or residential classroom into the online environment, even if it's just an hour or two, that class becomes hybrid, and therefore recertification will be necessary. Also, if a faculty member has not taught a hybrid or online course for 3 consecutive semesters, they need to be recertified. There's an evaluation window now that we have not had in the past. I think this is a good idea. It's something to support faculty, maybe faculty who were frustrated with classes being open for several weeks to evaluators. So presently, evaluators can evaluate online classes and hybrid classes if they're going into the learning management system for 2 to 5 days. And we'll talk about the specifics of that in a few minutes. All evaluators who evaluate DE classes, whether they're online or hybrid, must be certified to teach DE classes or receive an orientation by designated distance education staff. This is on Article 23, pages 102 through 103. You can find all of the information that I've described here, as well as more changes that have occurred with the AFT contract related to DE. So welcome to your orientation. Because the new contract required an orientation, we've put this orientation together so that you can all evaluate online courses. Okay, let's talk about our process now for evaluating online courses in light of what we know now about the ACCJC, Title V, and more importantly and specifically, our own district and AFT contract requirements. First, you need to ask the evaluatee, so the faculty member who you're evaluating, to request access for you into their online class from the instructional technologist or designer. So currently at Moorpark College, they would ask that of Tracy Bosquet. It is also okay if the evaluator asks that of Tracy Bosquet, but you would need to include that information, include the faculty member who you're evaluating on that email. Tracy's not going to give permission unless that person has been informed, and oftentimes it's just easier to have that person make the request so that they are aware because they're actually initiating it. So we're asking that people ask the faculty member who's being evaluated to request Tracy give the appropriate people access to their class. So that person would therefore be requesting access for their dean, their chair or chair designee, and the peer that they've selected. The next thing is to inform the evaluatee of the observation time frame in which you will observe them. Ideally, an evaluator should give the evaluatee a 2-week notice if possible. According to our contract, the recommendation is to give a 2-week notice. Usually that's not a problem. So we need to let the person know who we're evaluating when we will be coming into their class. Next, observe the evaluatee in the class for no fewer than 2 and no more than 5 consecutive days. To accomplish this, log in for the 2 to 5 day period you wish to observe the faculty member. This is a significant change in the contract. The contract or the courses that we're evaluating are no longer open for as long as they're left open. We are allowed to go in there for 2 to 5 days. What's more, we are supposed to be in there for at least 2 days within that 5-day window, but we cannot be in the class evaluating it for more than 5 consecutive days. Ask the instructional technologist or designer to remove you from the course when you're done observing. Do not re-enter the class after the 5-day window unless you request additional access from the person being evaluated. So we need to think about this the same way we think about going into residential or face-to-face classes. We let an instructor know when we're going to evaluate their class. We go in during that time frame in which we've asked, and we leave. If we decide we want to revisit the class, we don't just surprise and show up to revisit the class. We inform them that we're interested in coming back to the class. We give them fair notice, and then we re-enter. It's the same concept here online. The only difference is instead of a 50-minute window in which we go into a residential class, here we have, each time we enter the class, a 2 to 5 day time period. Interestingly, the contract expects you to log in for 2 of those days, so you should log in for at least 2 days. It also expects that you won't spend time in that class outside of the 5-day window. Note, if a faculty member is teaching a hybrid or a non-distance education course, you may request still to review their Canvas classroom environment. Okay, let's now talk about the content that's inside the evaluation forms with a focus on section 1 of the evaluation form first. Use the faculty evaluation forms as usual. Appendix D of your AFT contract provides you with those evaluation forms. So everything that we're covering here in this portion of the orientation really revolves around the AFT contract and those faculty evaluation forms. Section 1 focuses on professional qualities. So things like demonstrating cooperation and sensitivity in working with colleagues, staff, and students, maintaining adequate and appropriate records, maintaining office hours and being accessible to students, submitting required documents, reports, and other necessary paperwork, demonstrating continuing professional development in their subject area or assignment, and demonstrating progress towards self-determined individual and developmental goals. There are also departmental responsibilities and college-wide and instruction-related responsibilities that you talk about in this section. So professionalism is treated the same as in your residential classes. Fill out those boxes as you would any class for any instructor. Just follow the evaluation forms which have been defined and agreed upon by the AFT. Area and departmental responsibilities are the same as they are in residential classes. Okay, now let's look at section 2, section A of section 2. So section 2 is really about job performance and the overall evaluation. This is probably where most of us spend most of our time. A refers to the nature of the work in progress. So this is where we have that big box that we fill out, the narrative. Provide the narrative as usual. Consider how you do evaluations in residential classes and translate that to the online class. What kinds of things do you usually talk about? Discuss the content. The content comments, though, should focus on the time period you're in the course and the information provided in the syllabus. So things that you would look at during that 50-minute period, now you're looking at the lesson that was covered or lessons that were covered during that 2 to 5 day period. You're not looking outside of that 2 to 5 day period in terms of the lessons being looked at and the content being covered. Although you can see those things, you're not evaluating those for the content of the course. In the same way that if you were going to a residential class, you're looking for that 50-minute plus period that you're visiting their classroom. You're not looking at the lessons that they covered previously or the lessons that they will cover afterwards, unless you request to revisit the course. Now, in terms of professionalism, overall teaching effectiveness, course organization, navigability of the course, etc., you can highlight the faculty member's overall performance, not limited to that 5-day window. So anything that you would typically comment on about that colleague's professionalism, their teaching effectiveness, how they've organized things, etc., in this narrative section can be commented on, and it's not limited to that 5-day window. Okay, let's talk about section B. This is the distance education section. It still only has 3 questions that we answer. So let's talk about those. So first with section 2, we're talking about the job performance observation still. And in B, it's distance education. And the first question or first area in which we assess is follow all campus DE standards as adopted by the curriculum committee or the academic senate. And at Moorpark College, our distance education committee adopted the CVC OEI rubrics, and those were approved by the academic senate in 2016-2017. So when we highlight later the CVC OEI rubrics, it's not because we've decided that faculty should be applying them or this is what you should do in evaluating them in a vacuum. These rubrics have passed through the DE committee, been approved, and passed up to the academic senate as the best practices for our courses. The distance education section of the evaluation says, follow all campus distance education standards as adopted by, essentially, the academic senate. And this is what Moorpark College's academic senate has adopted. The second assessment question is, do they demonstrate the ability to use the learning management system or Canvas? This is pretty self-explanatory, and you would answer that as you perceive it. The third question is, do they use the appropriate mode of distance education communication? And you would answer that as you normally would as the third question. Most of that communication, of course, should happen within Canvas whenever possible. Now let's talk about section C of the job performance observation section. So now we're talking about classroom faculty. Do not skip this section. Canvas is the classroom. In some cases, faculty have thought, well, we're talking about instructional delivery, interaction, and content. This is for a residential classroom, not for an online classroom. That might be the case if we were doing correspondence courses, but we're not. Online classes have a classroom, and their classroom is virtual. It's the Canvas classroom. So in terms of instructional delivery, which is the first part of the classroom faculty section C part, they're looking at each item. You should be looking at each item, and all of them should be answered. All are relevant to online classes. So voice and delivery are clear and understandable. If there are videos that are produced, if there are synchronous sessions that you can view, or if information that they deliver in text format or in other formats is present, then you evaluate that. Do they employ multiple teaching approaches when applicable? Do they communicate ideas clearly, concisely, and effectively? Do they pace the class according to the level and material presented? Do they use class time effectively? Does the faculty member use a teaching method and technologies observed that are effective? And do they conduct class in accordance with the instructional schedule? These are the things that we answer always in that section for residential classes. We should do the same in the online classroom. There's also a faculty-student interaction section. Each item here should also be answered. All of them are relevant to online classes. So in the evaluation form, they ask you things like, are students engaged in the lesson? Does the faculty member demonstrate sensitivity to differing student learning styles? Do they stimulate student interest in materials presented? Do they measure student performance in a fair and valid way? And do they demonstrate sensitivity in working with students of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, and physical and mental disabilities? So all of those questions that you answer every time you evaluate a residential faculty member, you would also answer for your online instructor. And then the third part of the classroom faculty section C, part of section 2, is the content section. As you may recall, there are 3 sort of check boxes that are included. They want to make sure that the content of the lesson was current or Is it current, adequate, or outdated? Answer that as you see fit. Again, we're focusing in terms of content on the 2 to 5 day period and anything in the syllabus. Is the content of the lesson consistent with the course outline? And is the lesson appropriate for the level of the course? The usual. All of these questions can be answered for our online courses. Now let's look at section 2, subsections D, E, and F. D, E, and F refer to the counselors, librarians, and other non-instructional faculty members, respectively. Answer all these questions as you would any faculty member. Now, on our campus, we have online counselors. We do not yet have online librarians, and I am unsure if we have any other non-instructional faculty that you'd be evaluating in the online environment. But if we do, you would just use those sections as you would the others. All of the questions asked are relevant. Now let's look at section G. Section G of the job performance observation focuses on the overall comments and recommendations that we provide. This section is to be completed as you would any faculty evaluation, applying college professionalism standards and the CVC OEI rubrics as your guides for the content. So this is that overall performance section where you summarize what you've said throughout the evaluation and then give your rating of excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. Now let's look at section H. That's where you give that final assessment or your overall rating. In section 8 of section 2, you give an excellent, a satisfactory, a needs improvement, or an unsatisfactory. You need to select what makes sense to you as you would with a residential faculty evaluation. Be consistent with your own standards. There's nothing about this orientation that is intending to change, recommend, or suggest anything other than what you would normally do. You determine if a faculty member is performing in a way that you consider to be excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory as it fits within the Appendix D evaluation forms. If the faculty member earned a needs improvement or an unsatisfactory, you'll need to provide clear recommendations with well-defined guidance for improvement. These things will be included in the written improvement plan provided to the faculty member who's being evaluated by the dean. This is the general process that we do. It's standard for all residential classes as well as online classes. Now let's talk about Moorpark College distance education standards and more specifically, the CVC OEI rubric. Again, the CVC refers to the California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative, and they've put forward several rubrics that are considered to be the gold standard or best practices. And again, Moorpark College has adopted those as our best practices. So the CVC OEI rubrics were adopted by the campus and approved by the Academic Senate in spring of 2017. There are 5 general areas, and we're not going to go into detail on all the rubrics. We're just trying to give you as an evaluator a sense for what those general areas are. And there's a checklist that is provided as well that will help you follow these so that you don't have to remember them from this orientation presentation. The content presentation is a significant portion. The interaction in the class is one of the general areas of the rubrics. Assessment is where one of the general areas of rubrics lie. Accessibility, meaning ADA compliance, and then institutional accessibility, and we'll explain what that means. So the CVC OEI rubrics cover 5 general areas. Within there are specific guidelines or specific rubrics. So let's first talk about section A, the content presentation. So here we're looking at organization and student-centered learning. Is there clear course navigation limiting left navigation to the absolute necessities? This is one of the things that the CVC OEI has set forward as an expectation. Is there an inclusion of multimedia items so the class is not too text heavy or text only heavy? So multimedia items can include videos, they can include images or pictures, various things that break up the text and break up the space. The CVC OEI rubrics expect for the gold standard class, it is a best practice to include multimedia items. Also, are the student learning outcomes stated? So the learning objectives, are they in the syllabus or are they on a specific page so that students know what the SLOs or CLOs are for the course? Since those are also a part of the welcome letters from the deans reminding faculty to include those in the syllabi, most of you probably already have those in your syllabi and know that you can expect them of the faculty that you're evaluating. Student support is also a critical section. Does the instructor provide access to student support information like our access group or our disability student services area? Is there instructor contact info so that they know how to reach their instructor if they're struggling or need to talk to them? Do we have information about our tutoring center, the writing center, other student support services on campus in the class? Maybe it's in the syllabus, maybe it's on a page within the class. The CVC OEI rubrics for set out that a course is organized well so it's easy to navigate with multimedia, that the student learning outcomes or course learning outcomes are outlined, and that student support services at the campus are in the course in order to meet the best practice. Now let's talk about Section B, interaction, probably the most significant section that we review when we're in classes. So faculty contact is intended to be regular and effective contact. So according to the CVC OEI rubric, which again have been adopted by the Moorpark College Academic Senate, the rubrics state that faculty should manage expectations of their students regarding when they will be available. This is critical. We'll keep coming back to faculty managing their expectations because, of course, there'll be variability from one instructor to another. Faculty should log in to classes and engage with students on multiple days a week. The CVC OEI has a pretty high standard, but essentially what they're looking at is that faculty are in there more than once a week working with students. Faculty should respond to student messages within 1 to 2 working days and post grades with feedback within a week. The CVC OEI rubric also highlights that faculty should make sure that all students have individualized interaction with them as the instructors. This individualized interaction can come in a lot of forms. It could be replying to a discussion board post. It could be having individual office hours. It could include, and oftentimes is included in the grading rubrics where the students get their one-on-one comments from the instructor when they grade their assignments. Students should experience group interactions with faculty and peers. There are a lot of ways that we can do this. And as you noticed in our earlier part of this orientation, we talked about the ACCJC and Title V all looking at regular and effective interaction, and Title V including interaction among students. So Title V is leading what the CVC OEI have included as group interactions with faculty and peers. So there are a lot of ways in which you can create group interactions with the faculty and with peers. It can be in discussion boards. You could choose to do group assignments. There are various ways in which you could do that. You could have synchronous sessions that everyone attends and therefore they're interacting as a group. And there are many, many other ways to do that. I would encourage you to contact our instructional designer or our DE coordinator or any member of the DE committee for ideas on how to include group interactions with faculty and peers. Also, peer interaction, so student-to-student collaboration is a part of the best practice of the CVC OEI rubrics. And then community building. We should be looking for ways to create community by including activities that build a sense of community among online learners. As you're evaluating classes, you're looking for the interaction between and among faculty and students. That peer interaction with students may be a requirement that they reply to a certain number of their peers' discussion posts. So that's just one example of many. And then community building, ways in which the instructor creates settings that foster a sense of community. As instructors who are being evaluated are thinking about how evaluators will review them, it's a great opportunity before the evaluators go in to let them know, here's how I engage in effective and regular contact with students. Here's how I foster that between or among them. Here is also how I create community building opportunities. Sometimes it's easiest if we just help the evaluators know where they can find it. Okay, let's talk about section C, assessment, and also an important section of the CVC OEI rubric. Assessments need to align with our student learning outcomes or our course learning outcomes. So when there's an exam, it should be clear as you're looking at it that it references back to the course learning outcomes, which will of course reference back to the COR. There should be clear instructions for assessments. The clarity of instructions for completing an assignment or assessment is critical. Students won't be successful if that isn't clear. And so the CVC OEI rubrics, which we have adopted, have stated that we need to see clear instructions. So as we're evaluating a class, looking at how an instructor explains how a student is to complete an assignment and assessing, does that make sense to me? Would I be able to do that with those instructions? And giving appropriate feedback based on that is something that you could look at as an assessor. Also, instructor feedback, evidence of timely and regular feedback. This is critical. We know that one of the most important ways that we communicate with our students is with timely and regular feedback. The CVC OEI rubrics really stress the importance of timely, regular feedback so students can be successful in their online classes. So when evaluators are in the class, they should have the ability to see your gradebook and other places in which you provide feedback to students. Section D, accessibility, and we're talking again about ADA compliance. The overriding question here is, will a student using assistive technology be able to access all course content as required by Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973? Now, naturally, you're probably asking yourself, how the heck am I supposed to know that? Well, some of the things that you should look for include what we see in videos. If there's a video in the class, make sure that it's captioned. All videos must be captioned. If they're not, refer faculty members to the instructional technologist or designer for assistance. That can be a part of the evaluation, is that reference, so that they can improve that for the next time that they're teaching the course. It is required by law, so we need to make sure that we're looking at this. Also, all attachments must be accessible or readable by an assistive technology device. However, if faculty members post the content on the pages of Canvas instead of as attachments, Canvas forces accessibility. And we're rolling out the program Ally, which will help faculty members further in making their content accessible. There is an accessibility checker also in the classroom. So in any page, and there are pages within Canvas, a teaching faculty member can run the accessibility checker in the top right corner to see if their content is accessible, and then they can fix it. Whenever there is an attachment attached, they would have to run the accessibility checker to make sure that it is also accessible to people predominantly who are blind or visually impaired and using assistive technology device. But with most online classes, we can teach them without any attachments. We can put our content in the pages of Canvas, run the accessibility checker right there. If you put an image in Canvas, it won't post it until you attach the alternate text that explains what the image is. It actually forces you to make your classes accessible within Canvas. And the inclusion of Ally will help us with our attachments and videos as well. Okay, let's move on to Section E, the last section that is a part of the OEI rubrics, institutional accessibility. So here we're talking about the accessibility of external tools and third-party content. So remember, we were talking about the ACCJC having discomfort and concern with our courses that lead people to external sources, maybe provided by the publisher, or a website that we're familiar with or hosting ourselves, or another learning management system that we may ourselves be hosting, and suggesting that that's problematic. Well, the CVC OEI has responded to that accreditation response and included that as part of the rubrics. Faculty should only include external content that has been deemed ADA compliant or accessible by our institution. So if we are sending students to use applications or software or websites outside of Canvas, we need to make sure that those things are accessible. If you're unsure, please contact our instructional technologist / designer, and she or someone within our disability student services area will assess if something is in fact accessible to all students. If that external tool or third-party content is not accessible, that feedback needs to be given to the faculty member so that they can make it accessible or choose an alternative that is accessible in their class the next time they teach it. Okay, now let's talk about resources for you after completing this, if you're being evaluated or if you are the evaluator, and questions that you may have after this orientation. Resources for evaluations. You can look at the ACCJC Guide to Evaluating Distance Education and Correspondence Education. All you have to do is Google that and it will come up as a PDF that you can review. And within that, you can find some of that information that we've talked about in this presentation. Again, we have distance education or online courses. We don't offer correspondence courses. Also, you can look at the California's Title V Memorandum AA 18-11. If you just Google that, you will be able to find that information that was quoted here, as well as some additional information that was presented as the modifications to Title V with regard to distance education and accepted in the summer of 2018. Most importantly, though, is your AFT contract. Look at Section 23 that talks about all things distance education, and Appendix D is where you find those faculty evaluation forms. Everything within this orientation is derived from ACCJC guidelines, California's Title V, or mostly our AFT contract through the DE Section 23 or within Appendix D. You can also use the guide or checklist on the Moorpark College Distance Education website. The way to get there, the easiest way, is to go to Quick Links, then Distance Education, then the faculty site, and then you will see a subsection for evaluations. And there you will find a guide or checklist that covers all of the things that we talked about in terms of what you need to look for. That guide or checklist doesn't go into the history of the ACCJC, Title V, or all of the AFT contract information. It's just a one-page front and back information piece that you can use when you're evaluating classes online that provides the information that we discussed in those sections that were tangible to the Appendix D forms of the evaluation and the CVC OEI rubrics. For information on the guidelines presented, so you'd like to know more or understand it or have a discussion, for the CVC OEI rubrics or for a Canvas-based tour of a classroom, please contact our instructional technologist / designer, Tracy Bosquet, or you can contact our new DE coordinator, Anashe Garabigi, or you can contact the Dean of Distance Education, Jennifer Kalfsbeck-Getz. Thank you. Happy evaluating.